Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sorting Hat Podcast, the show where everything and anything can and will be sorted. I, as always, am your host, Michael Barryte, joined by my wonderful co-host, Katie Reed.
Sup?
As is customary on the show, our guest is an expert on the subject which we will be discussing and sorting, and we're joined again by the wonderful and talented Franky Guttman.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's so awesome.
Last time you had us on to talk about stuff that was highly disturbing.
Yes, if you haven't listened to our Zodiac Killer's letters, you should check that one out because we go
So I assume you're going to have
super in-depth.
something just equally as terrifying and will leave me thinking about it all day.
This will only be terrifying if you live in Sacramento, California, and are a fan of basketball. Otherwise, I think you're safe.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, so we are dealing with the NBA, specifically the Pacific Division, which it is worth disclosing, I am not a sports person with the exception of esports.
Listen, we started a podcast about Harry Potter because we wanted to know which house Harry Potter would be sorted, or which house Big Bird would be sorted into from Sesame Street.
Right.
That tells you everything you need to know about how good at sports either of us are.
So that said, I mean, we do, and so like when we were communicating with Franky, I was like, oh, he had mentioned NBA teams are a thing that he's fairly knowledgeable on. So I was like, all right, how do we break that down so it's a little more, like we can narrow the category a little bit. And as we were discussing off mic, apparently the concept of divisions is not really dealt with much.
Yeah, there's definitely divisions, and definitely the teams within the divisions are usually rivals. And you do play people in other teams in your own division more often,
Right.
But by and large, like nobody's like, oh, have you checked out the Pacific Division right now? Like, no, it's sort of an arbitrary distinction in some ways.
Gotcha. It is worth noting within the Pacific Division, if I am reading this all correctly, the teams represented are it consists of 5 teams. And it's the Golden State Warriors, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Phoenix Suns, and the Sacramento Kings.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because it's like a bunch of just California and then the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, and Phoenix, yeah.
But, like, I don't know if it was because I lived in Phoenix for a while, but I feel like the Phoenix Suns had, like, a time in the sun, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Where they were like a super fucking huge team.
They had 2 very good periods. They had in the 90s when Charles Barkley was on the team.
Yeah, that's probably what I'm thinking of.
And then later on in the late 90s, early 2000s when they had Steve Nash, who's a Canadian gentleman and was the most valuable player of the league. And they played, we're going to start with Phoenix, I guess?
I guess so.
Let's start with Phoenix.
Was Barkley on the team around the time that Space Jam came out?
Yes. Yeah.
That's what he was riding that wave towards,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, 'cause
yeah.
that was definitely like growing up in Phoenix around the time that Space Jam came out was bonkers. Like, if you didn't love the Phoenix Suns, like you probably should not even talk about it in mixed company.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to be discussing sports teams because they have like a long-standing history which contains an ebb and flow to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, if we're talking Space Jam era teams, like the Chicago Bulls are the undeniable champions because like Michael Jordan was a thing.
But we're not talking about Chicago. We're talking about
I know.
the Pacific Division today.
Right.
And the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah.
So give us a little backstory and like give us the skinny on the Phoenix Suns.
Okay, well, the Phoenix Suns today are sort of a rebuilding team. They have a lot. They actually started in a game yesterday, the youngest lineup ever to play in an NBA game.
Like youngest average
Average?
age.
Yeah,
What's the
youngest
average?
average age. It was like 20.3 years old or something.
That's wild.
Yeah, so they were actually-
these boys can't even drink, but
Yeah.
they're slamming balls and making millions of dollars more than money than I'll ever see in my life. I'm
yeah,
not
they're
bitter about
slamming balls.
it. Dude,
Yeah.
Balls.
And they were even so the NCAA tournament is going on around now when we're recording this, and they were younger than 7 of the 8 college teams that were playing
Oh,
this
that's
past weekend.
nutty.
That's how young the team is. So they're sort of in a rebuilding phase right now. They have a couple older, pretty good players on their team. Eric Bledsoe. And Brandon Knight, who probably don't have a lot of a future there. So they're kind of playing the kids right now.
Oh, gotcha.
And back in like, when was that, like late 90s, early 2000s, really was sort of prime Suns. Mike D'Antoni was their coach, who's famous for his 7 seconds or less offense. So basically the concept of that is you try to shoot in 7 seconds or less. So in the NBA, you have a 24-second shot clock, and a lot of teams try to milk the clock. And his thing was like, nope, run up the court, try to take a shot, and usually 3-point shots, which actually was kind of revolutionary for the NBA. Like now the big trend is everybody shoots 3-pointers, and the league is sort of gravitated that way.
That's because of Steph Curry.
Yes, who we'll talk about in a little bit when we talk about the Warriors.
Oh, good. That's a person who's relevant. I pulled that name out of like my just like
not
abstract knowledge.
not necessarily entirely out of your ass, but you were like grazing those cheeks.
Yeah.
I mean, the name has been floated around. I'm like fairly certain he's basketball.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, baby. So they were kind of the progenitors of the modern NBA.
So this strategy, the 7-second thing, is kind of like a blitzkrieg offensive.
Yes,
almost.
very similar. Yeah. Yeah, and so they were very, they had Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, Sean Marion, all very players whose main asset was their quickness.
Okay.
Based on what you're saying, and obviously I'm sure you have more to unpack.
Oh.
But based on just what you've said so far, I feel everything about this team from its current to its past feels very Gryffindor to me.
Now, I'm going to say, I'm not necessarily disagree with you. What are some of the weaknesses of the Phoenix Suns?
That's a worthy question.
Well, I guess as a franchise, they're in Phoenix. They're not a major market team, so they're never going to be able to sign big name free agents, or it's very difficult for that.
Phoenix is not a tourist destination.
Yeah.
It is. Phoenix, Arizona, with all due respect, I lived there from the time I was about 5 or 6 until I was about 10 or 11. Maybe it was just the fact that I lived in a very bad neighborhood in there, but it's a shithole. I'm sorry, Phoenix. I'm so sorry. I just never want to see you again.
It's a very arid climate.
Dude, they would set up tents in the summertime in Phoenix for old people because people would keel over from the heat. There were certain times that you could not leave certain plastics out in the sun because they would just completely melt. It is too fucking hot there.
Gotcha.
Why are you there, Phoenix? What's going on?
So, okay, based on just inherently like location, meaning as much as it does, the draw for most is not going to be Phoenix. You're going to want to be on a coast. So that's what the Phoenix Sun is running up against. I still will stick to my guns in saying Gryffindor.
Oh, sure.
I think for sure.
Based on like, first and foremost, like the strategic angle of them being like, let's go young, or let's like be bold and brash. Like, let's do something that is potentially destructive for our team, but like if it works, it pays back in big, like bold moves.
Also, my nerds, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, isn't there in the Harry Potter universe, like I'm just trying desperately to remember, there are like references to the Phoenix used in like Harry's storyline, right?
You mean like there's
Not the
Fox the Phoenix is like Dumbledore's bird.
Well, shit. I told you I don't know what I have. Okay, I've only seen like the first movie. That fucking Phoenix isn't in the first movie, is it?
I don't believe he is. No,
but,
he
so
shows up in 2, I believe.
Dumbledore has a Phoenix.
Yes.
Phoenix, Gryffindor. You're welcome.
Bam, solved.
What a wonderful set of gymnastics that Katie Reed just performed, landing with perfect form
10
on
out
the
of
mat.
10.
All the judges agree, even the French judge. What a surprise.
Oh, and we slept together. Thank you, French judge.
All right, so moving on.
Who should we do next? Let's do the Golden State Warriors
Okay.
next.
They
Golden
had
State
a
Warriors,
year
'cause
last year.
Yeah, they had a historic year last year. So the Golden State Warriors were they had a heyday in the mid-90s. They had a pretty decent team with guys like Chris Mullin, Mitch Richmond. They had Chris Webber for a little time.
Mm-hmm.
But they were never truly one of the top teams. And then for about 10, 12 years, the Golden State Warriors were kind of the laughing stock of the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
They were the worst team. Couldn't get anybody to go to their games.
Aw.
Didn't really have any players of any note. Their best player for a few years was this guy, David Lee, who was pretty okay, but just one of those, like, there is this weird in the NBA. There's this sort of reverse racism because the NBA is sort of like dominated by black players for the most part. So there is this weird element where like white players kind of get a weird reputation and like that, like
Is there
as
more
being
like
kind of shitty and
like
like
you have to prove yourself harder if you're
no,
white?
it's more just like because there's a stereotype of like the white player in the NBA is sort of the dude that kind of stands around the 3-point line, and like somebody like Steve Kerr, who's currently the coach of the Golden State Warriors, kind of just like lanky dudes that put up shots. So then when there's like when there's a white guy who's like a big bulldog type player that can like bruise in the post and stuff, it takes people by surprise for some reason because it's not
playing against the type that they
yeah, like
presume.
Larry Bird is like, Larry
okay.
Bird was a tough fucker, but he's had like an inside-outside game and wasn't thought of like a bruiser type guy.
Right.
But like,
He could do more on the
And,
court than just
yeah.
So what is part of the reason why the team got such a bad reputation is because they had more of those Larry Bird types in them?
No, I mean, they just sucked shit. They sucked shit. The owner was terrible. They could, they didn't know what they were doing as a
Right.
franchise.
Mhm.
Well, what turned it around?
So they got a new. Basically, what turned it around was they had incredible drafting, and they have a new ownership group, which is sort of like a Silicon Valley type ownership.
Of course.
Yeah.
Those
Which
nerds
is sort of
crunching their numbers, like,
Yeah,
what
so
are
they're
the best
moneyballing
drafting
it.
techniques?
They are moneyballing it basically, and so they got a lot of great players with lower picks in the draft. So Steph Curry,
who was
Yeah,
MVP
currently.
last year, right? Or no, is that not?
I should fucking remember who won that. I'm pretty sure he was MVP last year. He had an amazing season. They won the most games of any team. They won 73 games last year, which was the record.
How many games are played?
82.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I mean, because if you're like, they won 73 games, how many games did they play?
Yeah.
207. Like,
So they won more games. So Michael Jordan's Bulls won 72 one season, and the Warriors bested them last year.
gotcha, by one.
So they got
It was Curry.
Okay. Again,
Yeah.
justified as I reach into the ether and
Yeah,
pull
like,
out the correct
Good
answer.
job having these sort of things just stick in your brain as they
Every
come
now
up
and
in a
again.
restaurant.
I'm
bars.
impressed. I'm very impressed.
The right amount of knowledge has gotten stuck in the collective wrinkles of my gray matter, allowing me to almost carry conversations.
Yeah.
When we have that conversation about like cars or beer, though, man, I'm gonna be sunk.
I'm excited for those episodes. But to go back, so they had what was the turnaround? Like, how did this
Yeah.
go from like them being a laughing stock to breaking records?
So they got Steph Curry with so the NBA has a draft. The way that you get players, basically, all the eligible players are all into a draft pool, and generally the worst teams have the highest picks and the best teams have the lowest picks to try to distribute the good new players onto the worst teams. So usually, like for instance, most of the superstars in the NBA, they'll usually go with the first pick. Like LeBron James was the first pick.
Oh, sure.
Karl Anthony Towns is like a young superstar now who is the first pick. So normally, unless you have that top pick in the draft, it's kind of hard to find star players. So they got Steph Curry with the 7th pick. And he's basically blossomed. And at the time, he was sort of like had a reputation for being injury prone. The league wasn't really playing a 3-point pick and roll style of play, which it sort of gravitated towards. So people were very skeptical of him. He went to a small school, Davidson which I don't even know is a college or a university.
I have never heard of
Have
Davidson.
not, but
Yeah.
yeah, thanks for Curry. Davidson.
Yeah. So there was a lot of skepticism on him. So they got him with the 7th pick. They got Klay Thompson with the 11th pick.
That's another name
year.
that I've heard floating
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
I
Klay
can't
Thompson.
tell you if he's an offense or a defense, but
well, you play both in basketball. So.
see, that's me not knowing the game.
Everybody's offense and defense. And Klay Thompson is his backcourt mate and shooting guard, who blossomed into one of the best shooters in the league and was way better than anybody
Now,
thought.
were they able to anticipate that these men who were like up until now not necessarily considered to be the great players that they would go on to be? Was this like kismet, or was this like calculated?
I
by
would
these
say
nerds?
50-50, right? I mean, it's always kind of a crapshoot when you're trying to. I mean, the best. So the guy they got in the second round, which it's very rare to get a star player in the second round, is Draymond Green, who's one of the best defensive players in the league. Really, kind of their glue guy and the guy who really makes the team, I think, for them. And he was a guy, he went to Michigan State, and his thing was that he was undersized. Like, he had great stats basically in college. All the stats said he was going to be a great player, but sort of like the scouting element was like, well, his arms are short, or well, like, we don't see how he fits into
what
the NBA.
a weird. I mean, I guess that's like a thing that you obviously need to take into account, but that's such a weird modifier
Yeah.
of like,
When you don't,
we're
well,
measuring
you have to remember,
people.
like people who are professional athletes or dancers or anything, like, your body is just, even like the modeling,
No,
your body, like, you're just like a freaking animal.
And I know it's just
so strange.
I guess there's the weird part of me that sees that sort of thing as like, and maybe it also comes from like having recently watched Get Out. Like, there's like a slave trader like angle where you're like measuring.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they
like,
measure.
it's super weird.
People
yeah,
get
everything.
weird when there's so much money on the line. It's
This
what it
is
comes
fair.
down to.
This is
And
fair.
you can go online and you can find players. You know their shoe size, how long their arm span
Yeah.
is. You know, like lengths of their, like, from their hip to their knee bone and their knee
and
to
like
their leg.
people like
Yeah.
at UC Irvine, the school I went to, they have like a pretty decent college basketball team, or they did at the time I was going. And I don't remember the player's name, but he was known as having a pretty impressive wingspan. So at one point they had like straight up made a bus where his arms, like, apparently it was supposed to be like actual length of the back of the bus, and like it was like touching almost tip to tip of the bus. It was
What?
basketball players' bodies are bonkers.
They're huge. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, there was the Sports Illustrated for Kids magazine, and my favorite thing, it was Michael Jordan's hand, which took up the entire. It was his life-size hand. It took up the entire page of the magazine.
Wow.
And then you could just put your little baby hand and see
Right.
how much. Yeah.
I would do that today. I would
Yeah.
still be like, my baby hand.
Yeah,
touch
I mean, I have
his.
baby hands too, so.
So honestly, even though this might seem surprising, I'm gonna give this one to Ravenclaw.
Oh, I was thinking
let
Ravenclaw.
me finish the narrative a
Oh,
little bit.
no.
Yeah, because I
the
think
upset.
So basically, they were the historic team last year, and then they got to the finals. They played LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they were up 3-1, and they ended up blowing the series and losing. So they were this all-time team, but they did not win the championship. So then in the off season, they signed. So they have probably 3 of the 10 best players in the league. So this past offseason, they signed a 4th player of the 10 best in the league, Kevin Durant. So they're like this all-time
I know that
super
name,
team.
yeah.
And they just added another greatest dude of all time.
So
and
you thinking this is gonna be like a crazy ass season coming up?
Yeah, well, I
Is
mean,
it
right
already starting off?
now, yeah,
as
the
such?
season's we're almost at the playoffs right now, and actually Kevin Durant played for their Western Conference rival, the Oklahoma City Thunder, who took them to 7 games, and the Warriors just barely eked it out against the Thunder.
Oh, man.
And then in the offseason, they got the best player from the team that was best suited to defeat them. So, like, it's like if you could imagine,
Whoa.
like, yeah, if you could imagine, like,
I like.
if I'm
right,
trying to
right
yeah.
now, you're like, all right, gauging my audience.
Yeah.
What is the example? They don't know sports.
Yeah. it's like, think of like if the biggest badass team got the best player from their rival.
Yeah.
And so basically making their number one competitor so much worse and themselves that much better.
I mean, I'm again sticking to my guns on Ravenclaw. Is there more information for you to drop
but
on?
That's a pretty Slytherin move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they kind of couch it as, look, man, we're all young guys. This is our lives, and we just want to play basketball together. We just want to hang out and have fun.
But I would argue that move is like, it's not coming out of like dirty dealings. It's coming out of like the way that the league runs.
Yeah, and also like from someone who doesn't like really watch basketball, that seems like a sort of like, they have the best player, we'll get that best player, then we will be the best.
Yeah.
And that feels very like,
though it feels calculated, which is more like they're approaching it from a very mathematical standpoint. Just like, I mean, as soon as we were
would
like,
be more of like a crime of passion, sort of.
Yeah.
Like,
as soon as it clicked in my head of like, oh, this is Moneyball and like playing the stats, and we're working as like a Y Combinator sort of situation, Silicon Valley-esque, like that all like tinkered down correctly as Ravenclaw for me. I think.
So overall, as like the whole franchise, I would still give it to Ravenclaw, even though that is wild.
Should we then continue? I guess we've gone from Phoenix to San Francisco. Should we go down to Sacramento?
Sure, let's go to Sacramento. And the Sacramento Kings are another team that had a pretty decent team in like the mid 90s era, but basically since then have been the laughingstock of the NBA. I mean, the Clippers, who we'll talk about, were the laughingstock of the NBA for a long time, but the Sacramento Kings are basically the worst franchise in professional sports probably right now.
Out of any sport?
Out of any sport, I would say the Kings are the saddest franchise.
Which is such a shame based on like, one, the name being called the Kings and just being the worst, and then also knowing that like we have within hockey the name the Kings is like, oh, you mean the best goddamn hockey team in the world? Sorry, Canada. Like,
oh, you're going to get some maple leaves covered in blood in the mail from that.
If you just the thought of blood-soaked maple leaves, like what a horrifying image.
Well, and then another letter saying, "I'm so sorry, I lost my temper there."
Yeah, sorry.
So sorry, I lost my
Yeah, I mean, my favorite NBA team name is relatively new, the New Orleans Pelicans.
That's
which
awesome.
Is so great. Yeah, because
they have pelicans in New Orleans.
It's the state bird of Louisiana. I guess.
Really?
Yeah.
I learned a thing today.
Listeners, if you want to check out something creepy, just Google the Pelicans mascot and look at their progression, and they have some weird looking birds. And also they have there's that New Orleans king cake baby.
Oh yeah.
So they have this creepy king cake baby that runs around.
No.
Oh my God.
I don't want to be around that. Good Lord.
Oh
okay,
my God.
so
anyway, so the Sacramento Kings.
The Kings are just like fucking.
Yeah, so they have this owner, Vivek Ranadive, who's also a Silicon Valley guy.
Mm-hmm.
And
I imagine that's going to like be a ownership turnover more and more.
I mean, that's where the money is now too, is basically Silicon Valley and hedge funds. So he's like, well, the Warriors did it. The Rockets is another team that did it. I'm going to apply my excellent Silicon Valley management techniques to the Sacramento Kings. Except he has no idea what the fuck he's doing. So he hired Vlade Divac, who was a center who used to play for the Lakers and played for the Kings for a while.
Can I just say Vlade Divac sounds like a James Bond villain?
Yes, and in terms of how he's run the Sacramento Kings, is basically acted as a James Bond villain, I would say.
Oh no, what's going on?
So he has no experience running a team. He is just a player.
Mm-hmm.
And this is sort of a trend amongst the idiots in the league right now.
So this does happen periodically.
Oh, like the Lakers just hired, which we'll talk about. They hired Magic Johnson, who's a great player, to run their franchise, basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So Vlade Divac, no experience running a team, no experience scouting, doesn't know how the league works, doesn't know the rules of the league. Like literally the first time he tried to make trades, didn't know that he had to clear it with the league office.
Oh God, why would they appoint this
I
guy?
just liked him. Look, he's just a great personality, and he likes him as a guy. I mean, the Kings. So the Kings almost left Sacramento a few years ago.
Oh, really?
And basically, yeah. Kevin Johnson, who is a Phoenix Suns great, is the mayor of Sacramento, and he basically blackmailed the city into building a brand new arena. So they have this brand new arena in like downtown Sacramento. Gorgeous, gorgeous arena. Like it's amazing. It's probably the best one I've ever been in. Funded with public money, which is always a thing in sports. Whenever public money goes into the equation, it's always a scam. You're basically just giving money to the owner of the team so that your city can have a sports team. Now, maybe in the case of Sacramento, it's fair because they don't have any other professional sports teams and it kind of puts them on the map or something, but even so.
Right, for tourism and things like that. That's helpful because
Sacramento, another big tourist destination.
Well, I mean, I've been in Sacramento, and it's as humdrum and quiet as can be, which is crazy, especially when it's like you are the capital of California.
No, I always am like, how did this happen? Like,
it's a very pretty city. I will certainly give it that. The architecture around it, but it definitely has like a sleepy.
Yeah, it definitely is like it very much reminds me of Riverside, California.
Yeah.
And in terms of like, it's like not necessarily a big, huge city, and like its industries around it are like basically like keeping it going, but it's not necessarily something that people are like, I can't wait to visit beautiful Riverside, California one day.
It's just got like a remarkable sprawl and a lot of nature around it. I'll certainly give it that. But anyway, so publicly funded stadium.
So $233 million of public money went in to fund this stadium. So basically half the cost I just looked up. So their best player over the past 7 or 8 years is this guy DeMarcus Cousins, who played for Kentucky and is one of the best centers in the league, but also kind of has a bad rap as kind of like a troubled guy. He kind of has the record every year for most technical fouls in a game. And a technical foul is when you don't actually commit a foul in the game. You're just being a jerk. So the referees give you a foul and give the other
what's
team
an
a
example
shot.
of being a jerk?
Like cursing out the ref, pushing somebody.
So this guy's got a bad attitude.
Oh yeah, and like just last week he like flipped off a fan or something like that.
Fan?
Yeah, so he's a great player, but troubled guy, and he's been their main guy for the past, I want to say 6 or 7 years, and but they've never been able to win. I don't think they've made the playoffs in so many seasons.
So in this scenario, and forgive me if you've already stated this, based on the way that the draft works, would them being as low on the totem pole have meant that they were getting top draft picks?
Well, here's the problem, right? And it's sort of a kind of a crappy thing that's happening in the NBA is there's no reward for being like a mediocre team. So if you're a mediocre team, you pick early in the draft, but not early enough where you're going to get a star.
Yeah.
And so the Kings have had this problem where they're bad, but they're never bad enough to get that top pick.
So they're not the worst team in the league.
Even worse, yeah, they're not the worst. So there's a whole kind of tanking thing going on, which we'll talk about with the Lakers. Where the teams are competing, like the Lakers and the Suns are trying to get the worst record so that they can have the best odds of getting the best player.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So the Kings have even been bad at that. And this is how they're not even good at being bad. So Vlade Divac, when he first got on the team, he had a couple players who were eating up. In the NBA, there's a salary cap. There's a maximum amount you can spend on players. Sort of. We won't get into that. So he just wanted to get rid of a couple players. So he made a trade with the Philadelphia 76ers saying that basically if the Kings got a better draft slot, the 76ers could swap with them and get their higher pick. So basically, like for no reason, like he just wanted to get rid of these contracts that he could have just cut them. So he just gave the 76ers for the next 2 years basically rights to swap with the Kings. So like if the Kings win the lottery, they get the number 1 pick this year, it goes to the 76ers. So he just
idiots.
Yeah, because in his mind he's like, well, we're going to be a great team, so we're going to be better than them. So it won't matter because they won't swap with us because we'll be better. And of course they stink.
Okay. I know how Harry Potter fans feel about Hufflepuffs, unless you happen to be one, in which case you make your peace with God. the implication of being accused of being a Hufflepuff to the right kind of Harry Potter fan, usually people who are really passionate about it, is akin to calling them a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Calling them mediocre, saying that you don't matter. And for that reason alone, I would put the Kings as in Hufflepuff.
Oh, the Kings are so Hufflepuff. It gets worse. I just have to say, in case any NBA fans are listening, they traded DeMarcus Cousins like a month ago, and they got basically nothing in return for him. And all the other teams in the league were like, well, wait a second. Nobody even told us that he was available for trade. We would have offered better stuff for him. And they were like, yeah, well, the owner met with the guy from the New Orleans. They traded him to the New Orleans Pelicans, actually. The owner met with the GM of the Pelicans, and they had a conversation, and then they decided to do a trade together. Like the worst way. Like if you imagine you're trying to sell something.
This sounds like if I was trying to do draft picks and trades in the NBA.
I mean, basically,
with my base level.
We have the potential to make the Sacramento Kings the best team based on
just
like
this very basic information that you've laid out right now. I'm like, I could probably
I don't
go.
think they can go lower, right?
They literally cannot. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna become a Kings fan just because I'm like, oh, you little Hufflepuff team.
You're voting for that scrappy dog.
Yeah, it's got to be Hufflepuff.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're coming back to LA, baby.
Okay.
Are we gonna deal with Clippers or Lakers?
Clippers. Let's do Clippers. We
Okay.
can do them pretty quick. So the Clippers were the laughing stock. They were the Sacramento Kings of 10, 20 years ago. They were the team that was so bad, never made the playoffs.
Yeah.
Until and there's a little bit of drama. Well, they got Blake Griffin, who they got with the number 1 pick in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been a star player for them for a while. And then there was a little bit of intrigue.
Well, are you talking about the controversy around the owner of the Clippers?
Oh, well, there's that, which we can get into. But so Chris Paul, who's one of the best players of all time, a Hall of Famer, he was going to be traded to the Lakers. But the New Orleans team, they keep popping up, guys. They were being run by the NBA at the time. So the commissioner of the NBA was like, he vetoed the trade of Chris Paul to the Lakers. So instead, he ended up getting traded to the Clippers. And that sort of made the Clippers instantly, they became like a relevant team because now they have like, 2 great players on the team.
Right.
And then they have a third, DeAndre Jordan, who is sort of like a low round pick that they developed. So that's sort of like a triumvirate that's meant that in the past like 5-6 years, the Clippers have been consistently one of the best teams in the league, the most fun to watch. Their nickname is Lob City because they throw a lot of lobs, which is literally when the somebody
just
throws
goes
the
like,
ball up and the guy just fucking stuffs it into the basket.
Oh, hell yeah. I love that.
So they're sort of like...
That's kind of almost like when I think 90s basketball, like that's the game. Would it be Lob City sort of?
It's more... I wouldn't say so. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 90s basketball. I mean, they changed the rules. 90s basketball is more physical.
Gotcha.
More like back to the basket, bruising down under, a different style of play.
Understood. Sorry.
Yeah.
Lob City, back there.
Lob City. So it's really this story. And then, of course, we have Donald Sterling, who, a racist D-bag, the worst owner in the NBA, who wouldn't invest
What do you do that was racist?
What was it? What did he say? Oh, he has this like trophy. He gets
he has
married and he has a
girlfriend.
trophy girlfriend, and he didn't want her to take any pictures with black people and post them on her Instagram or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And she recorded him saying all of this and then just put the tape out as
How
like,
the fuck you gonna be racist and want to be involved in the NBA?
Yeah, it's
what
crazy.
the hell?
Well, to the credit of the league, they got his ass out so fast. And Steve Ballmer, the Microsoft screamy dude, ended up buying the team, who's like the best, most enthusiastic owner. So it really is this story of like a long period of sadness and neglect, and then just bursting out and becoming this like consistently they've never made it to the finals, so they've never really reached the top echelon, but just consistent.
But like
very good.
Sounds like Ron Weasley. It sounds like a Ron Weasley. So like like has some good stuff going on. He finally got Hermione, but he's not the star. He's never going to be the hero of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So I put that as a Gryffindor sort of, but in the Ron Weasley could have been a Hufflepuff sort of thing.
Yeah, like I definitely see that it's like, ooh, that balance is really on the cusp there.
Yeah.
We could roll into either camp, but we're going Gryffindor right now.
Yeah.
Like until you guys goof up real bad.
Yeah.
And so then, since we've got that one settled, we'll go to the Lakers.
Yeah, the Lakers. So, of course, the Lakers, on an all-time level, they're one of the all-time great NBA teams.
Oh, yeah.
They have the second most championships. You know, so many great players all over the years played for them. Wilt Chamberlain,
Like
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
there's nothing like living in this city when the Lakers are doing well.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. It's insane. Like I mean the energy, not just even like from downtown, but like every sports bar, there's just like this palpable like, oh, a game's going on there.
There was one time a few years ago, I don't know why I was in a gym. I think somebody why because I'm a freaking slug, but I happened to be in a gym. I was on a treadmill with my headphones in. And I don't really follow sports that much. And all of a sudden I heard screaming, just screaming and rushing around. And I thought some sort of accident had happened. Something really crazy had happened.
Mhm.
Maybe there's some sort of like crash or something. But the Lakers had just won a game.
Right.
Yeah.
It scared the shit out of me. Like the diarrhea ice cold was running down my leg. That's
Yeah.
how big the reaction was. And that was not anywhere near a sports bar. It just happened to be in a gym
Right.
in Los Angeles.
Well, I mean, I will definitely admit, while I do not speak sports, like if basketball is on, like I'll watch, and if it's the Lakers, there's an oddly magnetic pull that it has.
Yeah, I think part of it too is that the purple and gold is their colors, and there's not really any other team that
Right.
has
Looks
those
like them,
colors
yeah.
in any other sport
they
that I can
stand
think
out
of.
when they're on the court.
Yeah, and it's just such an iconic, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, James Worthy, just like such a history behind it.
Right.
And although now they're kind of in that tank race, they're trying to be the worst team. They haven't been good for the last
I
3
had
or 4
never
years.
even heard of like tank race. Like
Yeah.
that's such a strange
There
sort of
is, and this is a sidebar.
strategy.
And I don't remember the name of the episode, but there's a Radio Lab episode about during the Olympics. I believe it was like a Chinese team and a Korean
the
team.
ping pong team, right?
that they're-
Table tennis.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That they're both playing against one another, and they are purposefully trying to lose.
Or maybe it was badminton.
Yeah, it might have been badminton. You're right. And they're playing one another, but they're like purposefully trying to lose because in the bracket, whoever won was going up against like the number one like predicted winner of this tournament.
And they just didn't want to have to be
Well,
that.
Yeah.
no, because if they lost, the way it works is they would drop into like the losers bracket and presumably then have an easier road to like make it to grand finals.
Yeah, like a crappy
Oh.
team happened to win a bunch of games, and the loser of the game got to play the crappy team. So
Yeah.
they were both just not trying.
And then
That's
like there was a
hilarious.
ruling where they basically were told by everyone like you have to try, if you don't you'll both be disqualified.
I think they both ended up being disqualified, right?
Yeah, I think
Oh, man.
Spoiler
but
alert.
but it's still, again, I've spoken several
And are
times
there
over on
any
the
sort
show.
of things
Listen
like,
to Radio
Are
Lab.
there any like sort of rules put into
Well,
the NBA?
they're trying to figure it out because
Because like why? That's so fucking terrible
a
for
race
your
to
fans.
the bottom
Yeah.
is never
well,
fun.
you don't. I mean, if you lose, if you are the last team, you have a 25% chance of getting the top pick. So there's already a lottery where you're not guaranteed
Right.
to get the best pick. Even so, it's just once you're past a certain point, there's no point of winning, and the proposal I like is it's like once you get eliminated from the playoffs mathematically, the
Mhm.
team that wins the most games in that time period will get the best pick. So it's basically like, okay, you're out of it, but now and still means that the losingest team will have the most opportunity to win games because they'll
Right.
be eliminated first, but it still like incentivizes you to try to win games. It'll never happen.
I hate these sort of. Okay, now this is really showing my hand about how much I probably know about sports. I was like, I would consider myself like in a D&D sort of alignment chart, probably like a natural good person. Like I'm trying to like define like what's the essence of like what's right versus like, you know, what lawful good.
Yeah.
And I feel like, God, I hate when people game this system. Like, why don't you just like play the game to the best of your ability? And then however it shakes out is how it shakes out. Why are you doing like weird like cloak and dagger? Like we're going to throw this game so we can get this game.
It's probably because they saw that it was working for other people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, many of these sorts of sport, I mean, where anything has a lot of money on the line,
you
often are playing the catch-up game with like this group did something that like nobody was thinking about.
Yeah, it
now
just comes
we have
down to like recouping your losses and like trying to like set yourself up the best way the next time.
And it's the unfortunate thing of like, obviously then you need to decide like what's the one thing you're going to try to do, as opposed to like, oh, well, we've got like everyone's now trying to throw 3-pointers, like we should do that, but like at the same time like other people are trying to race to the bottom, so we should do that. And it's like you got to pick one, otherwise you're just gonna like wind up like the Sacramento Suns. Sacramento Kings. Sorry, I'm losing it all.
One element of the Lakers right now that may help us sort them is there's an element of hubris now, because they're the Lakers. They're this legendary franchise.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the way they've run the team now that they've kind of had a younger team and haven't been successful is, well, we're the Lakers. So great players are going to want to come here. We don't have to do much because we're the Lakers.
Now this brings me into I've posited this theory of mine about how sorting works, is that there are two houses who operate from a place of hubris, and there are two that do not. The two that do not are Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, and the two that do, who have the sort of pride, hubris, like could be their downfall, are the Gryffindors and the Slytherins. But Gryffindors would not necessarily be coasting on that sort of ego, so I agree with you, Slytherin.
Yeah, and I mean, I like to say it because I kind of hate the Lakers, but I kind of agree. You know, they're sort of, and now they're sort of also maybe another thing. They're run by this family, the Buss family. Dr. Jerry Buss was the owner for a long time, sort of like the benevolent dictator of the Lakers, and he passed away. So there's been a lot of family infighting.
Oh, really?
Because a
Even
bunch of his
more
kids,
Slytherin.
a bunch of his kids,
sure.
own the team, and now Jeannie Buss, his daughter, basically just fired two of her brothers from the team. Like
that's Slytherin as fuck.
Yeah, 3 weeks ago, she was just like, sorry, boys, fired them and hired Magic Johnson.
That's amazing. I will admit one of the dumbest questions I've ever asked earnestly, and I will say, I'll give myself credit. I think I was a child. I was like, why are they called the Lakers? We ain't got no lakes in LA.
I just looked into that, and it's because they're from Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And
what? I thought it was just I thought it was just a play on LA.
No,
they're originally a team from Minneapolis, and in Minnesota is like the state of lakes or something like that.
Okay, I'm gonna now call out the 6th grade class in Riverside, Auburndale Middle School. What the fuck? I got roasted to hell and back over this. Like, everyone gave me so much shit.
Well,
I feel vindicated.
I mean, it's a thing that happens and is
I'm gonna look up all the kids I went to
confusing
middle school with
just
on Facebook today.
When you've got like teams that are traded and suddenly like they had like a geographical tie with their
Utah
namesake.
Jazz is the best example of that. Utah Jazz. Yeah.
Dude.
Like, I mean, when I think Utah, I think Jazz.
There's some guy in Utah with like super long hair who is like Utah Jazz, and he's like playing at the golf course or something.
Right. So, okay, we've got them all sorted.
Yeah.
Right? We're feeling all good. And I mean, it's definitely like an interesting thing. So yeah, just to clear up on Lakers, it's just a regional thing. What the hell is with the Clippers? Like, as a complete
They were
sidebar?
originally the San Diego Clippers, and San Diego's like a Navy town, so it was like a Clipper ship.
Oh, yeah.
Dude,
Okay. I was like, what is that in reference to?
Yeah.
A good one-off podcast, I'm sure somebody's already done it, I should go find it, is like demystifying all of these sports names that make no goddamn sense.
Yeah, in relation to like where they are now and just tracking the history. of
The
all
Raiders
of that.
alone could have its own episode.
Yeah, I mean that's based off of Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes, definitely was not named before those movies came out.
Why? I mean, I don't think most things happened before those movies came out.
Spielberg nerd.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, baby.
With that said, I'd love to thank you once again, Franky, for joining us.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me.
You can
You made basketball something I could understand a lot better. So thank you.
So thank you for making it all palatable. You can certainly get more from Franky on his podcast. This is Dark Matters, which
Where it's less sports talk and more stuff about the occult.
Yes, more about the occult, paranormal, anything creepy and dark, anything you might want to hear about late at night when you're driving by yourself and you need to stay awake.
Mm-hmm. And the best part of it is
podcast for
it's also a call-in show, right?
Yes, you can call in. At 818-650-DARK dark and leave us a message and we'll play it on our show.
Yeah, he and his co-host Michael Bilo are some of my best pals. I actually help out on the show, so I sometimes take calls for them. But I am like first and foremost like one of their number one fans. So please check it out.
Yeah. And in addition to checking them out and giving them a good review on iTunes, certainly if you give the Sorting Hat podcast a good review on iTunes, we appreciate that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also reach us on Twitter at Belated Media, or you can reach Katie
At that Katie Reed, and feel free to let me know how much more I'd have to fail downwards to be on the Twitter bottom of the
Right.
face.
Franky, you are not on Twitter.
I am on Twitter. I have one tweet. You can do it if you go at Guttman here. You can see my one tweet. On
Gotcha.
Twitter.
Wow, I'm so
Yeah.
I
and like
anticipate.
favorite and retweet the hell out of
Oh
it.
Yes,
yeah,
thank
smash
you.
that fave button on that one tweet.
So with that in mind, thank you all so much for joining us on this episode of The Sorting Hat. Goodbye. Come on and slam. And welcome to the jam.